She arrived as a mail-order bride, but God sent her a veteran with a healing heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The story you are about to hear begins with a young woman, desperate for a fresh start, crossing an ocean to a new land. She had little left behind in her homeland, a small village that had seen better days, a family she would never see again, and the quiet ache of a life filled with unspeakable loss. For years, she had worked long hours, doing what she could to make ends meet, but still the weight of loneliness clung to her. That is when the decision was made. She had found an advertisement in a newspaper, an offer for a chance at something better, a chance for love. A mail-order marriage. It promised security, companionship, and perhaps, for once, happiness. She took the leap, sending her photo, her hopes, and her heart across the ocean to a stranger who had also been searching for something more. In return, she received a letter from him. He was a man of few words, a soldier who had seen the world in ways she could never understand. His letter was simple, kind, but with a certain distance that made her heart race with both excitement and fear. A part of her wondered if she had made the right choice. He was a man from a foreign land, with a past he kept hidden, a past filled with scars that went beyond the physical. But the thought of living in this foreign land, free from the shackles of her past, was enough to keep her going. She boarded the ship to America with nothing but her dreams and the hope that somehow, love would find its way into her life. As the days passed on the ship, she found herself daydreaming about the life she would build, the man she would marry, and the family she would one day have. But deep down, she could not shake the feeling that there was more to her story than what she had imagined. What she did not know was that her journey had already begun, not just to a new country, but into a life she could never have predicted. A life that would begin with a chance encounter, a man with a past he could not escape, and a love that would be stronger than she ever believed possible. But first, she had to meet him. And when she did, nothing could prepare her for what was about to happen. The ship rocked gently as it made its way across the vast Atlantic Ocean, and with every passing day, Elena's anticipation grew. The excitement she had felt when she first boarded had slowly begun to morph into a mix of hope and fear. Her life, once small and confined to a quiet village, was about to unfold into something new, something unknown. She had spent the past few weeks on the ship reading and rereading the letter from her future husband, Thomas. Each word had been carefully written, but it still felt distant, as though the true man behind the letters was hiding behind a veil of secrecy. He was kind, his words gentle, but there was something in his letters that made Elena feel both reassured and uncertain at the same time. As the days passed, she wondered if the connection they shared would be enough. Would he be as welcoming as his words suggested? Would he truly understand the loneliness she had carried for so long? These questions swirled in her mind as the ship glided through the calm seas. By the time the ship docked in New York, Elena felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. She had imagined this moment in her mind countless times. The big city, the bustling streets, and most of all, Thomas, waiting for her on the pier. As she stepped off the ship and onto the solid ground, the realization hit her. This was it. Her life was truly beginning, but not in the way she had thought it would. The hustle and bustle of New York felt overwhelming at first. Elena stood on the crowded pier, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the faces of the crowd, trying to pick out her husband-to-be among the sea of strangers. Just as she began to feel overwhelmed, she saw him. Thomas stood at the edge of the crowd, looking just as she had imagined, yet somehow different. His broad shoulders and strong build suggested the strength of a man who had lived through much. But his eyes, those were the eyes of a man who had seen things he would rather forget. Elena felt a pang of sadness as she approached him. She had hoped for warmth, for a man who would embrace her and offer her comfort. Instead, she was met with a reserved figure who held a quiet intensity in his gaze. His hand reached out to hers, and for a moment, Elena hesitated. Would this man be the one to heal her wounds, to offer her the love she had been searching for? Thomas smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He had clearly been through his own struggles. His weathered features told a story of a life that had been hard and unforgiving, but something in his stance gave Elena hope. "Welcome to America, Elena," he said, his voice deep, though his words were soft. "I'm glad you're here." Elena could see the pain in his voice, a silent acknowledgement that he, too, was searching for something he didn't quite understand yet. His smile, though faint, gave her a glimmer of hope. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch. It wasn't the warm embrace she had imagined, but it was enough. As they made their way through the crowded streets, Elena couldn't help but notice the way Thomas moved. He walked with purpose, each step firm and resolute. It was clear he wasn't one to linger, to waste time on idle chatter. His silence spoke volumes, and Elena couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the surface of this man. When they finally reached Thomas's home, a small but sturdy house on the outskirts of town, Elena was both relieved and apprehensive. The house was modest, yet it carried a quiet strength, much like Thomas himself. He led her inside, and for the first time since arriving in this new land, Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had no idea what the future would hold, but at that moment, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a journey she could not have imagined. The night was quiet as they sat together, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. Thomas had made dinner, a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, and they ate in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Elena felt the weight of the silence between them, but she knew that in time, it would be filled with words. They didn't need to speak yet. They were both navigating this strange new world, and that, Elena realized, was enough for now. As the evening wore on, Thomas excused himself, retreating to a small room at the back of the house. Elena sat in the quiet, reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. She had come here hoping for a fresh start, but now, she realized, she had no idea what the future would hold. What kind of man was Thomas? Could he truly be the one to help her heal, to bring the love she so desperately needed? The night stretched on, and Elena could hear the faint sounds of the house settling. In that moment, she knew that her journey was just beginning. And somewhere, deep inside, she felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this was where she was meant to be. Days passed since Elena's arrival in America, and slowly, the silence between her and Thomas began to shift. At first, it was the quiet that filled the house. Every morning, they shared a simple breakfast, often without speaking. Elena would gaze out of the window at the unfamiliar landscape, the rolling hills and vast fields that stretched out before her, while Thomas would sit across the table, his thoughts distant, his hands steady as he sipped his coffee. But there were moments when their gazes met, moments when something unspoken passed between them, a fleeting connection that neither of them fully understood. Despite their differences, Elena couldn't help but feel drawn to him. She saw in his eyes a quiet pain, a burden he carried but never spoke of. And though she had come here with the hope of building a life filled with warmth, she began to realize that the journey ahead would not be as simple as she had imagined. One evening, as they sat in the living room, the silence grew heavier, and Elena, unable to bear it any longer, decided to break it. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "do you ever talk about your past?" He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, his gaze seemed to harden, as though he were bracing for something. But then, just as quickly, the walls around him softened. "Not much," he replied, his voice low and hesitant. Elena waited for him to continue, but he remained silent, as if unsure how to explain the things he had buried deep within him. She felt a tug at her heart, a desire to understand, to help him find peace. But she also knew that healing wasn't something that could be forced. "I understand," she said quietly, not pushing him further. They spent the next few moments in silence, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. Elena couldn't help but wonder what had shaped Thomas into the man he was. What had he experienced that made him so distant, so unwilling to share his heart? Over the next few days, Elena took small steps to make the house feel more like home. She cleaned, rearranged the furniture, and brought small touches of comfort to their space. She wanted to make it a place where both of them could heal, a place where they could start anew. But it was clear that healing would take time, for both of them. One afternoon, As she was out in the garden tending to the flowers, Elena caught a glimpse of Thomas standing at the edge of the porch, staring into the distance. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment, she wondered if he was lost in thought or reliving painful memories. She walked over to him, her footsteps soft on the gravel path. "Thomas," she said gently, "is everything okay?" He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she arrived, his eyes softened. "Just thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" Elena asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Thomas hesitated, then slowly began to speak. "About the things I've seen, the things I've done," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena's heart tightened as she realized that this was the first time he had allowed himself to speak of his past. She knew then that this was a moment of vulnerability, a moment when Thomas was finally beginning to open up. She stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You don't have to. Talk about it if you're not ready," she said softly. But Thomas shook his head, his eyes clouded with something she couldn't quite understand. "I need to," he said, his voice raw. "I've lived with it for so long, it's time I let it out." Elena nodded, not knowing what to say, but feeling a deep sense of respect for him in that moment. "I'm here," she said simply. And in that moment, she realized that healing wasn't just about moving forward. It was about acknowledging the past and giving each other the space to confront it. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, the atmosphere felt different. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that they would face whatever came their way together. As the days turned into weeks, Elena and Thomas continued to navigate their new life. Slowly, Thomas began to share more of his past with her, the battles he had fought, the losses he had endured, and the wounds that still haunted him. Elena listened, offering him her quiet support, understanding that healing would not happen overnight. But with every conversation, with every small gesture of kindness, they began to build something stronger than either of them had expected. Elena began to realize that this man, who had once seemed so distant, was not just a stranger she had married. He was someone who had been broken, just like her, and together, they would find a way to heal. As time passed, their connection deepened. The silent moments between them grew more comfortable, no longer filled with tension, but with the quiet understanding that they were no longer alone in this journey. Elena had come to America searching for love and a new beginning. But what she had found was something far more profound, a shared path of healing, forgiveness, and hope. And though their journey was just beginning, Elena knew one thing for certain. This was only the start of something truly beautiful. Days passed, and the house began to feel more like a home. Elena and Thomas settled into a routine, each day bringing new discoveries about each other. Elena had grown accustomed to the quiet mornings with the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, the slow pace of life that had once felt so alien to her. Thomas, too, had begun to open up more, though his past still lingered in the shadows. He would talk about his experiences, briefly, sometimes just in passing, but every time he spoke, it felt like a small piece of him was healing, and a small piece of her heart was learning to understand him more. It was on a rainy afternoon, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, that Elena decided it was time to take another step. They had been living in the quiet together, each wrapped in their own thoughts, but she wanted something more. She needed to know that they were moving forward together, not just side by side, but with purpose. "Thomas," Elena began, her voice gentle, "I've been thinking. We've been here for a while now, and I feel like we're both healing, but I think we need to find a way to move forward, to really build a life here." Thomas looked at her, his brow furrowed, but there was no anger or resistance in his eyes. He was just listening. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. Elena took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "I mean, we've both been through so much, and I think it's time we start finding something that brings us joy, something we can share. I want us to build something together, not just this house, but a life. I want to know who we are, not just who we were." Thomas sat back, his gaze turning inward. For a moment, Elena thought he might close himself off, but instead, he nodded. "You're right," he said, his voice filled with quiet acceptance. "I've been stuck in the past for so long. I haven't really thought about what comes next. But I want that too. I want something better for us." Elena smiled softly, feeling a sense of relief. They had both been walking in the shadows, but now, perhaps for the first time, They were starting to step into the light together. Over the next few weeks, Elena and Thomas began to shape their future. They started with the small things, like tending to the garden together, laughing over simple dinners, and taking long walks through the fields. They began to talk about their dreams, their hopes, and even their fears. Elena dreamed of opening a small bakery, a place where people could gather, a place filled with warmth and love. Thomas, ever the practical one, was hesitant at first, but as they talked more, he saw the spark in her eyes, and something within him began to shift. One day, as they sat together in the garden, Elena broached the subject again. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "A bakery? Something simple, something where we can share what we have with others." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Elena held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I think you're right," he said. "It's time to start something new. We've both been through enough pain. Maybe it's time we give something back to the world, start something that brings us joy, not just survival." Elena's heart swelled with happiness. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of certainty. They were moving forward, together. The next few months were a whirlwind of work and planning. They found a small building in town, an old, run-down space that had once been a general store. Together, they cleaned it up, painted the walls, and installed a small oven. They worked side by side, their hands touching as they moved through the tasks. Slowly, the space began to take shape, and with each passing day, the dream of their bakery became more real. As they worked, Thomas opened up more, his quiet nature softening with each moment they shared. One evening, as they sat in the almost finished bakery, Thomas looked at her, his eyes full of emotion. "I never thought I could have a life like this," he said softly. "I thought I was beyond saving. But you've shown me that healing is possible, and that I can love again." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out to him, taking his hand. "We've both been broken," she said quietly. "But together, we can heal. We just have to believe that we deserve it." The following month, their bakery opened. The community embraced them with open arms, and the once quiet couple began to find their place in the world. They served pastries, hot coffee, and homemade bread, and people came from miles around to experience the warmth they had created. The bakery became a symbol of their journey, a place where healing and hope were baked into every loaf of bread, into every cup of coffee. Their life was no longer just about survival. It was about thriving, about giving love and receiving it, and about moving forward, no longer burdened by the past. In the quiet moments, when the shop was closed and the world outside slowed down, Elena and Thomas would sit together, hand in hand, knowing that they had found something far more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. It wasn't the life they had expected, but it was the life they had created together, a life filled with love, healing, and hope. Months had passed since Elena and Thomas had opened their bakery, and their life, once filled with uncertainty, had now taken root in a way neither of them had imagined. The small town had embraced them with open arms, and the bakery quickly became a local favorite. People came in for the warmth of the pastries, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the kindness of the couple who had created this haven. For the first time in a long while, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. The shadows of his past were still there, lurking in the corners of his mind, but the more time he spent with Elena, the more he realized that those shadows no longer had the power to control him. Elena, too, had found a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. She had arrived in America searching for love, for a fresh start, but what she had found was so much more. She had found a partner who, though scarred, was healing. Together, they were building something that was uniquely theirs. One chilly autumn afternoon, as the leaves outside turned vibrant shades of red and gold, Elena and Thomas stood behind the counter of their bakery, their hands moving in rhythm as they worked side by side. A familiar quiet had settled between them, but this time, it wasn't a silence that spoke of unspoken pain. It was a silence of comfort, of two people at ease in each other's presence. As Elena kneaded dough, her mind wandered back to the early days of their marriage, to the uncertainty that had loomed over them both. She had come to America expecting a life filled with love, but instead, she had found a man who was broken, a man who had struggled to open his heart. But now, she saw a different side of him, a side that was willing to love, to heal, and to share a life with her. Thomas, for his part, had come to realize that the love Elena offered wasn't just a fleeting kindness. It was a deep, unwavering love that had slowly begun to heal the wounds he had carried for so long. He had never thought that he would be capable of such love again, but with Elena by his side, he felt the possibility of a future filled with hope, forgiveness, and healing. That afternoon, as they worked in the bakery, a knock on the door interrupted the quiet hum of the shop. Elena looked up, and to her surprise, a familiar face stood on the other side of the door. It was Sarah, one of the women who had been a regular at their bakery since the beginning. Sarah had always been kind, always shared a smile, but today, there was something different about her. She stepped into the bakery, her eyes wide with excitement. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said breathlessly, "but I have some incredible news." Elena and Thomas exchanged a curious glance before Sarah continued. "I've been thinking about you too, about how you turned this little bakery into such a beautiful place. And I wanted to help." Sarah's excitement was contagious, and Elena smiled, intrigued by what Sarah had in mind. "What kind of help?" Elena asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well," Sarah said, "I've been organizing a community event for the holiday season, and I'd love for you two to be a part of it. I know you're both a little shy about the spotlight, but this could be a great opportunity for you to share your story and your bakery with even more people. You've created something really special here, and I think others need to see that." Thomas, who had remained quiet, looked at Elena, his expression unreadable. But there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The thought of being in the spotlight, of sharing their story with the community in such a public way, was something that made him uncomfortable. For years, he had lived in the shadows, keeping his past locked away, hidden from the world. But Elena saw something in his eyes, a hesitation, yes, but also a spark of something more. A willingness to step out of the shadows, to embrace the life they had built together. "I think we should do it," Elena said softly, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "We've come this far, and maybe this is our chance to share who we really are, to let others see the love we've built." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing the decision. He had always been the one to retreat from the spotlight, the one who had kept his heart guarded. But as he looked at Elena, standing there with her warmth and kindness, he knew that this was a step they needed to take together. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Let's do it." The weeks that followed were filled with preparations. Sarah had been right. Being a part of the community event was a bit outside of their comfort zone. But with each passing day, the idea began to feel less daunting. Elena and Thomas worked hard to prepare, baking their best pastries and getting the bakery ready for the big event. The day of the event arrived, and the bakery was buzzing with excitement. The whole town had gathered to celebrate the season, and Elena and Thomas found themselves at the center of it all. People came in, sharing stories, enjoying the food, and most importantly, showing their support for the couple who had built this bakery from nothing. For the first time, Thomas felt the weight of his past begin to lift. The more he interacted with the people in the town, the more he realized that his past didn't define him. He was no longer the man he had once been. He was a man who had found love, who had found healing, and who had found a community that accepted him for who he was. As the event drew to a close, Elena and Thomas stood together, their hands intertwined, watching the people leave with smiles on their faces. The bakery was filled with the laughter of new friends, and for the first time, they felt truly at peace with the life they had created. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in that moment, they knew that this was just the beginning of the beautiful life they would continue to build together. The weeks that followed the community event brought with them a sense of calm and contentment that Elena and Thomas had never expected. The bakery continued to thrive, and with each passing day, the town embraced them more deeply. It was no longer just a place to buy bread and pastries. It was a symbol of resilience, of two people who had come together to heal and build something meaningful. Yet, even with all the success, Elena knew that there was still something lingering in Thomas's heart, a shadow that hadn't quite disappeared. She could see it in the quiet moments, the way he would sometimes look out the window, lost in thought, or when he would retreat into the silence of his workshop, his eyes far away. Elena knew that there was still more work to be done, more healing to be had. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Elena decided it was time to ask the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Thomas," she began softly, I've been thinking. I know we've come a long way, and I know you've been through a lot, but I want to make sure we're both moving forward, not just together, but in the way that we both need. Have you thought about what comes next for us? Thomas looked at her, his expression thoughtful. He had always been a man of few words, but Elena knew that he didn't shy away from tough conversations. After a long pause, he finally spoke. I have, he said quietly. I've thought about it a lot, and I think I'm ready to move forward. I've carried so much for so long, and it's hard to let it go, but I know I need to. Elena's heart swelled with relief. She had known that Thomas had been struggling to let go of the weight of his past, but hearing him say the words was something else entirely. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You don't have to do it alone, she said softly. We've come this far together, and we'll keep moving forward together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a team. Thomas smiled, a small, genuine smile that warmed her heart. I know, he replied. I don't want to be stuck in the past anymore. I want to build something new with you. Over the next few days, Elena and Thomas began to discuss their future in more depth. They talked about their dreams and their fears, about what they wanted from their life together and what they were willing to let go of. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. And with each word spoken, they both felt a little lighter. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold with the setting sun, Thomas took Elena's hand and led her outside. The air was cool, the scent of fresh earth mingling with the distant sound of birds calling in the trees. They walked down the path that led to the small field behind the bakery, the one where they had spent hours working together, planting flowers and vegetables, and dreaming of what they could create. Thomas stopped at the edge of the field, looking out over the land with a sense of quiet satisfaction. I've been thinking, he said slowly. Maybe it's time we expand. Not just the bakery, but everything. I want to build something bigger, a place where people can come, not just for food, but for community. A space where we can create something that lasts. Elena felt a rush of excitement at his words. She had always known that Thomas had a vision, a quiet ambition that he had kept hidden, and now, it seemed, he was finally ready to share it. What are you thinking? She asked, her voice filled with curiosity. A farm, Thomas said, his voice steady and sure. A place where we can grow our own ingredients, where we can offer fresh produce, where we can teach others to do the same. A place where people can learn how to live off the land, to connect with the earth. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The idea was bold, but it felt right. It felt like the next step in their journey, a step that would build on everything they had already created. I love it, she said, her voice filled with excitement. Let's do it. And just like that, their next chapter was set in motion. Over the next few months, Elena and Thomas began the long process of turning their vision into reality. They started small, purchasing a plot of land just outside of town, and began building the infrastructure they would need to grow crops, raise animals, and expand their bakery into a full-fledged farm-to-table business. It wasn't easy, and there were many obstacles along the way, but they tackled each challenge together, as they always had. As the farm took shape, Elena and Thomas began to see the fruits of their labor. They planted rows of vegetables, built a small greenhouse, and even started raising chickens for fresh eggs. The community, once small and uncertain, began to take notice. People came to the farm, buying fresh produce, visiting the animals, and watching as the dream they had built together slowly came to life. It was hard work, but it was rewarding in ways they had never expected. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and as they worked side by side, they realized that this new chapter in their lives was not just about the physical space they were creating, it was about the life they were building together. Elena and Thomas had started this journey as two people who had been broken by their pasts. But now, as they stood together on the land they had worked so hard to cultivate, they realized that they were no longer just healing. They were thriving. And with each new day, they knew they were one step closer to the life they had always dreamed of, a life built on love, hope, and the quiet strength that came from working together. As the farm grew, so did the sense of fulfillment Elena and Thomas felt. The work was long and hard, but every seed planted, every vegetable harvested, and every egg collected brought them closer to the dream they had envisioned together. The farm was no longer just a piece of land. It was a symbol of their resilience, their love, and the new life they had created after so many years of hardship. But with the growth of the farm, there were also challenges they hadn't anticipated. Managing the farm, expanding the bakery, and keeping up with the demands of the growing community put a strain on their time and energy. They had built something beautiful, but the weight of it all began to wear on them. One evening, after a long day of work, Elena sat down at the kitchen table, her hands aching from hours of planting. She looked at Thomas, who was sitting across from her, his brow furrowed in concentration as he reviewed the farm's ledger. His face was tired, and for the first time in a long while, Elena could see the strain in his eyes. "Thomas," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I know we've come so far, but are we pushing ourselves too hard?" Thomas looked up at her, his expression filled with a mixture of weariness and understanding. He had always been the one to shoulder the burden, to push through, but lately, he had begun to question if they were taking on too much. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I thought I could handle it. But sometimes, I feel like we're both running on empty." Elena's heart ached as she watched him. He had carried so much for so long, and now, the weight of their dreams was threatening to break him. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "We don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "We've built something incredible, but maybe it's time we ask for help. We've got a community that loves what we're doing, and maybe it's time to lean on them." Thomas sat back, taking a deep breath. Elena was right. He had spent so long keeping his struggles to himself, thinking that if he just worked hard enough, everything would fall into place. But now, he realized that the strength they had built together was not just about pushing through the hard times alone. It was about sharing the load. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "Maybe it's time to let go a little. We can't do everything by ourselves." They spent the next few weeks reaching out to the community for help. It wasn't easy for Thomas to admit that they needed assistance, but he knew that it was the only way they could keep moving forward without losing everything they had worked so hard to build. To their surprise, the response was overwhelming. People in the town, many of whom had visited the bakery or bought fresh produce from the farm, were eager to lend a hand. Some offered to help with the planting and harvesting, others volunteered to assist in the bakery, and a few even offered to help with repairs around the farm. It was a humbling experience for Elena and Thomas. They had always been independent, thinking that they needed to do everything themselves. But now, they saw the true power of community. How, when people come together, they can create something far greater than the sum of their parts. With the help of their new friends, the farm and the bakery thrived. The pressure on Thomas and Elena eased, and they were able to focus on the parts of the business they loved the most, the creative aspects of baking and the joy of seeing the fruits of their labor grow. The farm continued to flourish, and as the seasons changed, they began to expand their offerings. They started offering cooking classes, teaching people how to use the fresh produce they grew to create their own meals. The bakery became a gathering place for the community, where people shared stories, laughed, and connected over a cup of coffee and a slice of homemade pie. Elena and Thomas found themselves surrounded by the very people who had helped them build their dream, and for the first time, they realized that their journey wasn't just about what they had created, it was about the relationships they had built along the way. One evening, as they stood together in the field, looking out at the land they had cultivated, Thomas turned to Elena. "Do you remember when we first started?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with emotion. Elena smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I remember," she said. "We didn't have much, but we had each other. And now look at us." Thomas nodded, his gaze lingering on the horizon. "I never thought we'd get here," he said quietly. "But I'm glad we did. I'm glad we did it together." Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his words. "Me too," she said. "We've built something amazing. But the best part is that we've built it with love." As the sun set behind them, casting a golden glow over the land, Elena and Thomas stood together, knowing that the future they had dreamed of was no longer a distant hope. It was their reality. And with each passing day, they knew they were growing stronger, not just as individuals, but as a couple, as a family, and as a community. The farm and the bakery had become more than just businesses. They had become a testament to the power of love, hard work, and the support of those who believed in them. They had built a life, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had helped them along the way. And in that moment, they realized that the greatest blessing of all was the community they had created together. As The seasons passed. Elena and Thomas's farm and bakery continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Their love for each other and the hard work they had put into their dream was evident in every loaf of bread, every jar of jam, and every freshly picked vegetable they sold. The couple had created a life for themselves that they were proud of, but as time went on, they realized that the future they had built was not without its challenges. One crisp fall morning, as Elena walked through the rows of crops, she noticed that something was off. The once thriving vegetables seemed to be wilting, the leaves turning a yellowish brown. She ran her fingers through the soil, her heart sinking as she realized that something was wrong. The soil, once rich and fertile, had begun to lose its vitality. She could hear the faint rustle of the wind, but the usual hum of the land, the sound of life thriving, seemed to have quieted. Elena's thoughts immediately turned to Thomas. She needed to talk to him. She rushed back to the house, where Thomas was already starting his day, his hands deep in flour as he prepared for the morning's baking. She could see the worry in his eyes as she approached. "What's wrong?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. Elena took a deep breath, her voice shaking slightly. "Thomas, the crops, they're not doing well. The soil, it's not as healthy as it used to be. I think we've pushed it too hard. We've been growing so much, so quickly, and now I think the land is showing signs of exhaustion." Thomas's face fell as he listened to her. He had always prided himself on being able to handle anything, but this was different. The land was the foundation of their dreams. Without it, everything they had worked for could collapse. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice heavy with concern. Elena looked at him, her heart breaking. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I think we need help. We've been so focused on expanding, on growing, that we've neglected the very thing that made all of this possible, the land." Thomas nodded, his mind racing. They had worked so hard to build their business, but in doing so, they had overlooked the delicate balance that came with farming. He knew they couldn't keep pushing the soil beyond its limits. Something had to change. Over the next few weeks, Elena and Thomas sought out experts in sustainable farming, hoping to find a way to restore the health of the land without sacrificing their dreams. They learned about crop rotation, soil enrichment, and sustainable farming techniques that would allow them to continue growing food without depleting the earth. It was a slow process, and the work was grueling. But as they implemented these new practices, they began to see small signs of recovery. The crops began to flourish once again, the leaves regaining their vibrant green color, and the soil becoming richer with each passing day. They had learned the hard way that growth, both in business and in life, required balance. They had pushed too hard for too long, but now they understood that the key to sustaining their dream was to nurture the land, not just take from it. One afternoon, as Elena stood in the field, looking out at the crops that were now thriving once more, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been difficult, but they had learned valuable lessons along the way. The land, like their relationship, needed care and attention. It needed time to heal, time to recover, and time to grow. And just as they had done with each other, they had learned how to give it the space it needed to flourish. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena and Thomas sat together on the porch, watching the last light of the day fade away. The air was cool, and the sounds of the farm had settled into a peaceful quiet. "We've come a long way," Thomas said softly, his voice full of reflection. Elena smiled, leaning into him. "We have," she agreed, "and we've learned so much." Thomas kissed the top of her head, his heart full of gratitude for the journey they had shared. "I don't think we would have made it if we hadn't done it together," he said. Elena nodded, her heart swelling with love for the man who had stood by her side through every challenge. "No," she said quietly, "we wouldn't have." And as they sat together, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, Elena realized that their journey was far from over. They had built something beautiful, something that was rooted in love, hard work, and the understanding that life wasn't just about taking. It was about giving, nurturing, and growing together. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, but through it all, they had come out stronger. And with each new challenge, they would continue to grow, side by side, building the life they had always dreamed of, a life filled with hope, love, and a deep, abiding respect for the land that had given them everything. Together, they had created something that would last, something that would stand the test of time. And in that moment, Elena knew that no matter what the future held, they were ready for it. Together, the days that followed their hard-won success on the farm brought a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. Elena and Thomas continued their work, now more mindful of the land they had cultivated, knowing the importance of balance in their lives. They had learned that true growth wasn't just about pushing forward. It was about nurturing what they had, tending to the small details, and allowing time for things to develop at their own pace. They still had dreams, but they were no longer in a rush. The community had come to rely on them not only for fresh produce and delicious baked goods, but for the quiet example they set of perseverance, love, and patience. Their farm had become more than just a business. It was a beacon of hope for those who believed in second chances, for those who understood that with hard work, anything was possible. One sunny afternoon, as Elena walked through the rows of thriving vegetables, she couldn't help but smile at the beauty that surrounded her. It had been a long road to get here, and sometimes the weight of their journey still felt heavy, but standing there in the fields, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The crops, the animals, the bakery, everything was thriving because they had learned to care for it all. Thomas joined her outside, wiping his hands on his jeans after working in the barn. His face was weathered from the sun, but his eyes shone with the same quiet determination that had brought them this far. He stood beside her for a moment, taking in the view. "It's hard to believe we've made it this far," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Elena looked at him, her heart swelling with love. "We've worked hard, but it's more than that, Thomas. We've built this together, step by step. And now, we're finally starting to see the fruits of our labor." Thomas nodded, but there was something else in his eyes, a look that told her he wasn't just talking about their farm. There were moments when his past still haunted him, when the weight of his previous struggles felt too heavy to bear. Elena had seen it in his eyes, the brief moments of distance, of retreating into his own thoughts. She knew he wasn't completely free from his past, and she also knew that it would take time to heal those final wounds. But he was healing, piece by piece, just as she had, and she was determined to help him carry that weight, as he had done for her all these years. "I know," she said softly, taking his hand in hers. "But we're not alone anymore, Thomas. We have each other, and we have this community. We've built something beautiful, and I think it's only just beginning." They stood there together for a while, the warmth of the sun on their skin and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees filling the air. They had created something that was uniquely theirs, a life filled with love, hard work, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they had fought for every inch of it. Over the next few months, Elena and Thomas continued to refine their business, finding new ways to integrate sustainable practices and deepen their connection with the land. They started offering farm tours, where visitors could see how their produce was grown and even participate in the harvest. They began teaching cooking classes, showing people how to use their fresh ingredients in creative ways. And as the bakery continued to thrive, they added new items to the menu, experimenting with new recipes that reflected the seasonal bounty of their farm. But the most rewarding part of their journey wasn't the success of their business. It was the way they had transformed their lives. They had learned to live with intention, to nurture not only the land, but also their relationship with each other and their community. The farm became a place of healing not just for them, but for the people who visited it. They had built something that wasn't just about profit or success. It was about creating a space where people could come together, share their stories, and experience the love and warmth that had been woven into every loaf of bread, every jar of jam, and every meal that was served. One chilly evening, as they sat together in the kitchen, the soft glow of the fire illuminating their faces, Elena looked at Thomas, her heart full of gratitude. "We've come so far, haven't we?" she asked, her voice filled with emotion. Thomas smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "We have," he said, "and we've done it together." Elena nodded, her heart swelling with love for the man who had been by her side through every challenge. "I don't think I could have done this without you," she said quietly. Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "And I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "You've given me a chance to believe in something again, to believe in love, in hope, in the future. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed his hand. "We've given each other that gift, Thomas. That's what love is." And as they sat there, surrounded by the warmth of their home and the life they had built. They knew that the journey wasn't over. They had built something lasting, something beautiful, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The future was theirs to create, and they were ready for whatever came next. As the months rolled on, Elena and Thomas continued to find new ways to enrich their lives and deepen their bond. The farm was thriving, and the bakery was more than just a source of income. It was a living, breathing testament to the life they had built together. They were no longer the same people who had first met, uncertain and full of doubts. They had grown, not just in their business but in their hearts, and the love that had always been there now had a foundation strong enough to withstand any storm. But as with all good things, change was inevitable. One morning, as Elena was tending to the garden, she noticed something that caused a slight pang in her chest. A change in the air, a shift in the seasons. The air was crisper, the leaves on the trees were turning, and the once vibrant flowers were starting to fade. She had always loved the fall, but this year, it felt different. There was a bittersweetness to it, a reminder that even the most beautiful things must eventually come to an end. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Elena shared her thoughts with Thomas. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft, "about how much has changed, about how far we've come." Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with warmth and understanding. He knew what she meant. He felt it too. "I've been thinking the same thing," he replied. "We've built something incredible, Elena. But I think we both know that the world around us is always changing, and we have to be ready for whatever comes next." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It was true. Life was never static, and they had worked hard to create something that could withstand the ups and downs that came with it. But no matter how much they had accomplished, there were still uncertainties ahead. The farm, the bakery, their relationship, all of it had been tested, and they had come out stronger each time. But what would the next challenge be? And would they be ready for it? "What do you think comes next?" Elena asked quietly, looking at Thomas with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Thomas thought for a moment, his gaze turning inward. He had always been someone who believed in pushing forward and never staying still. But this time, the future felt different. It wasn't just about the next big step. It was about what they wanted to create, together. "I think," he said slowly, "we need to look at what we've built and decide what's truly important. What matters most to us?" Elena's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what he meant. They had worked so hard for so long. But what did they want beyond all of this? What was the ultimate purpose of everything they had built? "I want to keep growing," Elena said, her voice filled with conviction. "But I also want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that keeps us connected to each other, to this land, and to the people who have supported us." Thomas smiled, his hand reaching for hers. "I want that too," he said softly. "We've created something beautiful, but it's not just about the farm or the bakery. It's about the people we've become and the life we're living. And I think it's time we take a step back and really appreciate what we have." The next few weeks were filled with reflection and decision-making. Elena and Thomas took a step back from their daily routines, spending more time together, talking about their hopes and dreams, and discussing what they wanted for the future. They still had the farm and the bakery, but they knew that they needed to find a way to balance their work with the life they had always dreamed of. They spent long evenings sitting on the porch, watching the stars, talking about their past, their present, and their future. It was during one of those nights, as they sat together, that Elena realized something she had known all along. The love they had for each other was the foundation of everything they had built. It wasn't the land or the bakery that had made their lives beautiful. It was the way they had come together, the way they had learned to love and trust one another, and the way they had fought for their dreams together. As the days passed, Elena and Thomas began to make changes that reflected their newfound understanding. They scaled back some of their commitments, focusing on what truly brought them joy. They spent more time enjoying the quiet moments, the walks in the fields, the evenings by the fire, the laughter shared over a meal. They realized that the pace of life didn't have to be dictated by endless work. They could still grow, still expand, but in a way that allowed them to stay grounded, to remain connected to what mattered most. With this renewed sense of purpose, Elena and Thomas began planning for the future, not with urgency or pressure, but with a sense of peace and balance. They wanted to continue to share their love for food, for the land, and for each other with the world, but they also wanted to create a life that allowed them to appreciate the journey they had taken together. Their dreams were no longer just about building something big. They were about building something meaningful. And as they looked to the future, Elena and Thomas knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, side by side, with love and determination guiding them every step of the way. As the crisp autumn air settled over the farm, Elena and Thomas found themselves reflecting more deeply on the journey they had traveled together. Their decision to slow down and focus on what truly mattered had made all the difference. It was not about striving for endless growth anymore, but about living a life that felt rich with purpose and fulfillment. The farm and bakery continued to thrive, but now they were able to enjoy the simple joys of their work, the quiet moments spent together, the soft glow of the morning sun on the fields, the sound of their laughter echoing through the bakery as they baked side by side. But even with all the peace they had found, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As much as they had embraced their work and their community, there was still a part of her that felt the need to connect with something larger, something beyond their small corner of the world. One evening, after a long day of harvesting and baking, Elena sat down on the porch, the soft rustle of the wind whispering through the trees. She looked out over the land, her heart heavy with thoughts she had not yet shared with Thomas. He joined her, his presence grounding, his quiet strength always a comfort. "You've been quiet tonight," Thomas said, taking a seat next to her. "What's on your mind?" Elena turned to him, her eyes soft but filled with a quiet determination. "I've been thinking about what's next for us. Not just the farm or the bakery, but for us as individuals," she said, her voice hesitant but steady. "I think we've come so far, but I still feel like there's something more for us to do." Thomas listened intently, sensing the shift in her words. He had always supported her dreams, and he could see that this was something important. "What do you mean?" he asked gently, giving her the space to explain. Elena took a deep breath, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. "I've been thinking about giving back more, about expanding our reach beyond this community. We've built something amazing here, but I feel like we're meant to do more, to help more people. Maybe it's time we share our story and the lessons we've learned with others who could benefit from it." Thomas paused, considering her words carefully. For a moment, he was silent, as if measuring the weight of her thoughts. He had always believed in the power of their work, the healing that came from the land and the connection they had with the people around them. But the idea of reaching further, of expanding in a new direction, was a challenge. Still, he could see the fire in Elena's eyes, the passion that had always driven her to create and share. "I think you're right," he said finally, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We've learned so much along the way. Maybe it's time we share those lessons with others, help them find their own path. We've been so focused on building this life together that we haven't really thought about how we can give back on a larger scale. But I'm with you, Elena. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Elena smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. She had always known that Thomas was her rock, but in that moment, she saw the deep trust and partnership that had grown between them. They were ready for whatever came next. Over the following weeks, they began to brainstorm how they could take their passion for farming, baking, and community building and expand it beyond the boundaries of their small town. Elena reached out to local schools and community centers, offering to teach workshops on sustainable farming and healthy cooking. They also started offering online resources, sharing recipes, tips for growing your own food, and the importance of living in harmony with nature. The response was overwhelming. People from nearby towns, and even across the state, began to reach out, eager to learn from them. Their story, once a small tale of love and resilience, was beginning to resonate with so many others who were looking for a change in their own lives. It wasn't long before Elena and Thomas were invited to speak at community events and conferences, sharing their journey and the lessons they had learned about love, work, and healing. They found themselves traveling more, meeting people from all walks of life, and inspiring others to take the first steps toward building a life that was as connected to the earth as it was to the people around them. It wasn't always easy, and the travel took its toll, but Elena and Thomas found that their shared mission gave them a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just building a farm or a bakery anymore. They were helping others to build their own dreams, creating a ripple effect of positivity that spread far beyond what they had ever imagined. As the year came to a close, Elena stood with Thomas in the center of their farm, looking out over the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. The crops had been harvested, the bakery had been bustling, and they had given so much to the community. But now, as she looked out over the horizon, she realized that their work was far from finished. They had built a life that was rich with love and purpose, but they were ready to continue growing, to share what they had learned, and to help others find the same peace and fulfillment they had found. "We've come so far," Elena said, her voice filled with gratitude. "But this is just the beginning." Thomas smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Together," he said, "there's nothing we can't do." And with that, they knew they were ready for the next chapter of their journey, a chapter that would continue to inspire and uplift everyone they encountered, one step at a time. As winter approached, Elena and Thomas found themselves at a crossroads, having already accomplished so much in their journey. Their work had expanded far beyond their initial expectations, and their farm and bakery were thriving. Their community outreach efforts had grown, and they were helping to spread the message of sustainability and healing far beyond their small town. However, despite all the success, Elena felt a stirring within her, a desire to explore new horizons, to push their vision even further. She knew that the work they were doing was important, but she felt that there was more to be done, more to offer. One evening, after a busy day in the bakery, Elena sat down beside Thomas, her thoughts racing. The fire crackled softly in the background, and the warmth of the room contrasted with the cold of the night outside. Thomas looked up from his work, sensing that something was on her mind. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Elena took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what we've built, about all the people we've helped, and I think it's time for us to take things even further." Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "How do you mean?" Elena paused for a moment, her eyes reflecting the quiet intensity of her thoughts. "I think it's time we take the lessons we've learned and share them with a larger audience. Not just locally, but nationally. We've built something beautiful here, and I believe we have the power to inspire others, to show them that they can create their own healing spaces, just like we did. Maybe it's time we take this message to a broader platform." Thomas sat back, processing her words. It was clear that Elena was passionate about the idea, but it would mean a big step forward, a leap of faith that neither of them had taken before. "It's a big step," Thomas said carefully. "But if anyone can do it, it's you. And I'll be right here beside you, every step of the way." Elena smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. She knew that Thomas's support was unwavering, and with his encouragement, she felt ready to take the next step. They spent the following weeks planning their next move. Elena began reaching out to organizations that supported sustainable farming, health and wellness, and community building. They sought out conferences, workshops, and speaking engagements where they could share their story and their message of healing. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to make a difference. As winter turned to spring, Elena and Thomas found themselves traveling more often, visiting new cities and towns, and meeting people who were inspired by their story. They spoke at events, shared their journey, and connected with others who were looking for ways to live more sustainably, to heal, and to build stronger communities. Each time they spoke, Elena could feel the impact of their words. People were listening. People were taking action. They began to see the ripple effect of their work, not just in the people they met, but in the growing movement they were becoming a part of. Their mission had expanded from a small farm and bakery to something much larger, a movement that was changing lives and inspiring people to take control of their own futures. But as they traveled, Elena and Thomas began to feel the weight of their growing responsibilities. The farm and bakery still needed their attention, and the demands of their outreach efforts were taking a toll on their time and energy. One evening, after a long day of speaking at a conference, Elena collapsed into a chair beside Thomas, exhaustion written all over her face. Thomas looked at her with concern. "Elena, you've been pushing yourself too hard," he said gently. "You've been giving so much of yourself to this, but you need to take care of yourself, too. We can't do it all at once." Elena nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had always been the one to push forward, to chase after the next goal, but now, she realized, she needed to pause, to recharge. "You're right," she admitted, her voice soft. I've been so focused on helping others that I've neglected myself. Maybe it's time we slow down a bit, focus on what's really important, and take a step back from all the travel. Thomas smiled warmly and reached for her hand. We'll take it one step at a time, together, he said. We've done so much, and we've built something incredible. But it's okay to rest, to recharge, to focus on what truly matters. We'll find a balance. And so, Elena and Thomas made the decision to scale back their outreach efforts, focusing on local projects that allowed them to continue their mission while also giving them space to care for their farm and their family. They returned to their roots, spending more time in the fields, teaching local workshops, and building deeper connections with their community. As the year came to a close, Elena and Thomas stood on their porch, watching the sunset over the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. The world outside was busy, but in that moment, they knew that what they had built was enough. They had created something lasting, something real. They had found peace in the work they had done, the love they had shared, and the community they had nurtured. Their journey had brought them to places they never could have imagined, but it had also shown them the power of slowing down, of being present, and of taking care of what truly mattered. We've come a long way, Elena said quietly, looking at Thomas. He smiled, his eyes full of love. And we've only just begun, he replied. Together they knew that whatever the future held, they were ready to face it, side by side, with love, determination, and the unwavering belief that they could continue to make a difference, one small step at a time. As the first snow of winter began to fall softly across the farm, Elena and Thomas found themselves reflecting on everything they had accomplished. The farm was now more than just a place where they grew food and baked bread. It was a living testament to their resilience, to the love and determination that had seen them through every challenge. The community they had built around the farm had flourished, and they had given so much of themselves to help others. But as the seasons changed, so too did their perspective on what it meant to live a fulfilling life. They had been so focused on expanding, on reaching more people, that they had almost forgotten to savor the life they had already created. And now, with the quiet of winter settling in around them, they knew it was time to slow down and appreciate what they had. One evening, as the last of the autumn leaves drifted to the ground, Elena sat by the fire in the kitchen, a warm cup of tea in her hands. Thomas joined her, his work boots still dusty from the day's chores. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Elena turned to him, her heart full of gratitude for the journey they had shared. We've come a long way, haven't we? She said softly. Thomas smiled, his eyes soft with the weight of their shared experiences. We have, he replied. And I think we've finally found the peace we were looking for. Elena nodded, her thoughts drifting back to the days when they had first arrived, uncertain and full of hope. When we first started, I don't think either of us could have imagined how much we would learn, how much we would grow, she said. Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. No, he agreed. But we made it. Together. And that's what matters most. Elena smiled, her eyes shining with love. It is, she said. We've built something beautiful, Thomas. And we've done it the right way. Not just for us, but for the people we've helped along the way. They sat together. In the quiet of the evening, watching the fire burn low, feeling the deep contentment of knowing that they had created a life that was rooted in love, in hard work, and in the quiet strength of their partnership. As the months passed and the snow continued to fall, they spent their time reflecting on the next chapter of their lives. They had given so much to their community, shared their story with others, and helped others build their own dreams. But now, it was time for them to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to take the lessons they had learned and apply them to the life they wanted to continue to build together. They took long walks in the snow, hand in hand, enjoying the stillness of the world around them. They spent evenings by the fire, talking about their future and dreaming of the possibilities. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but they also knew that together, they could face anything. Their love had been tested in ways they never could have anticipated, but it had only grown stronger. They had built something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. The farm, the bakery, the community, they had created it all, step by step, with love and determination. And now, as they looked ahead, they knew that they were ready for whatever came next. The world was full of possibilities, and together, they would face them all. One evening, As they stood together on the porch, watching the stars sparkle in the cold winter sky, Thomas wrapped his arm around Elena, pulling her close. "We've built something beautiful, haven't we?" he said softly. Elena leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "Yes," she said, her voice full of love and peace. "We have." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the farm they had nurtured, Elena and Thomas knew that their journey was far from over. They had come so far, but there was still so much to do, so much more to give. Together, they had built a life that was filled with love, purpose, and the unwavering belief that anything was possible. And as they stood there, hand in hand, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, side by side, with the same love and determination that had guided them from the very beginning. In this heartwarming journey of love, resilience, and transformation, the story follows the path of a couple who defy the odds and create a thriving life from the ground up. Filled with lessons of hope, hard work, and determination, this tale explores how two people, a former soldier and his wife, embark on a journey of healing and discovery, not only for themselves, but for their community. Their lives are forever changed as they learn the importance of balance, the beauty of nurturing the land, and the power of helping others. Through their journey, they demonstrate the spirit of perseverance and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Their story is one of many veteran stories that show the power of second chances, the ability to overcome obstacles, and the joy of finding purpose in the simplest of things. With each step, they redefine what it means to build a life together, sharing their wisdom with the world and inspiring others to do the same. As their journey continues, they become a beacon of hope for others, showing that it is never too late to begin again. This is one of many veteran stories that prove that no matter the challenges, love and hope can lead to unimaginable success. The life they create, filled with love and community, is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the impact one couple can make. Through their journey, these veteran stories remind us all that no matter where we start, the future is always full of possibilities, and together, anything is possible.